You're listening to the Jules and Coffee Hour, sharing the stories of Blizzard gamers around the world. Pull up a chair. We're glad you're here. It's episode 27 of the Jules and Coffee Hour. I'm Jules.
And I'm Coffee, and I'm concerned because I may have a disorder. I'm not sure.
Really?
Hoping to learn more.
Well, I think we may have done just the right thing for this podcast today because we've got a special guest, the person that could diagnose this disorder for you right now. It's the Esports Psychologist. It's RomedyMC. Welcome to the show, Romedy.
There he is.
Hi. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
You and your sweet little kitty cat who is just hanging about and having a blast with you. Welcome to the cat show, by the way. I mean, you're in the right company, the three
That's
of
true.
us together. Cat mom, cat dads. It makes a good combination. But we're not here to talk about cats. We are here to talk about the brain and psychology and all that lovely stuff. So we've been having a lot of guests on this show recently because we've been having a lot of great topics, which is awesome. And Romedy and I have gotten to know each other this year, and which was awesome. Of course, we're super busy and running in different directions, but I got a message out of the blue the other day from my friend Romedy, and he's like, I want to talk about something. And it was pretty important. So, Romedy, what did you want to talk to us about today?
My Twitter blew up about internet gaming disorder. And part of me felt so happy that people would reach out to me and say, hey, here's this thing that's going on. Help us understand it. And part of me was really, really frustrated when I actually started going through the hashtags and the trending. And I was like, wow, there's all this out there and we really don't know what we're talking about. And so I wanted to go somewhere and talk to some people and try and get that misinformation corrected, get it fixed.
Yeah. So let's start out by actually talking about who you are and what you do, because if someone hasn't met you, they may be like, who the heck is this guy?
Right.
We know you very well, but let's talk about who you are and what you do.
So that's a great idea. So I have kind of a long bio here, so I'll go through it really quick. I am a PhD student at the University of Toledo, Ohio right now. I'm in the clinical psychology program there. And my dissertation, the research that I work on at the University of Toledo, is directly related to internet gaming disorder. And I take a little bit of a different approach to it. The internet gaming disorder, the people who actually work on it are psychiatrists, so people who have a medical degree. They're medical doctors. Those are the people who actually have to come up with the criteria. I am a clinical psychologist, which means I have a hand in medicine, but I also have a hand in the counseling world. And so I bridge the gap between those two things. So my approach to internet gaming disorder is with this model that we refer to as iPace. So it's internet, and it's how the internet interacts with the combination of the the intersection of the internet and your personality, your emotions, and your cognitions. And that's what the iPace model stands for. So it's a little bit different approach. Before I was a PhD student, I was an adjunct instructor at the University of Washburn, and that's in Topeka, Kansas. While I was there, I taught courses, but most importantly, I was the director of the Psychology and Gaming Research Laboratory, where we looked specifically at the interactions between diagnosable clinical psychopathology and any number of internet behaviors. Whatever students brought to me, that's what we researched. So I have this big bio for it, and internet gaming disorder is specifically my area of expertise. So that's why I thought, hey, I need to be talking out about this stuff. It's incumbent upon me to educate the population about this thing, because what we're saying on the internet is unfortunately not correct. So
Yeah. Okay. So when your Twitter blew up,
yes,
what were people saying to you?
Okay, so a lot of what I got was concerns, like immediately concerns about people who are high volume internet users saying, oh my God, do I have a disease? And that was probably 50% of my mentions at that time. And then the other 50% of mentions that I got were people who were referencing me saying, hey, what's your opinion on this? What are your thoughts on this? That kind of jazz. So it was kind of split. It was kind of split both ways. and that was the initial reaction anyway.
I love how, like, half of us would have been like, "Is it me? Do I have a problem?"
Yep.
Oh, yeah,
Coffee,
that's
did
the
you
first thing
do
I thought.
that?
That's the first thing I did. I took a hard look at myself and said, wow, I just spent like 16 hours playing WoW Classic. Do I need to reconsider what's going on right now in my life? But it's interesting because I looked at this a little bit too when it came out, and what I was realizing is that and correct me if I'm wrong, Romedy, is this something that's been around for a while that just hasn't been recognized by the World Health Organization? Is it something that's been, researched and, considered, but now that the World Health Organization is officially recognizing it, is that why it's in the forefront of, the news right now?
Okay, so that's a complex question. The short answer to that is yes. Things don't just show up as diagnosable disorders in psychology, in the medical world. It's not just like one day it's not a disorder, then the next day it shows up. There's in the World Health Organization is a little different than in the United States, but there's at least a 5 year 5 years worth of research into a specific area, and in order to become a diagnosable disorder, and I don't know what the numbers are for the World Health Organization, but there's a specific number of multi-site trials that have to have been run, and it has to satisfy all these different criteria. Now, the reason I say it's a complex question is it's a little bit of a chicken or the egg thing when we start to try introducing new disorders. And it in some ways it makes sense because the internet is this newer phenomena in the last 30 years, right? And it's really hitting its stride now. And so if there's going to be a new disorder, it's probably in the realm of the internet. But it also kind of feels like shooting an arrow, like from a bow and arrow, you shoot an arrow. You're not shooting at a target, you just shoot the arrow, and then you run up to it afterwards and you paint the bullseye right around the arrow, and you're like, look, I hit the bullseye. It kind of feels a little bit like that too, because if you go looking for a disorder, the chances of finding that specific disorder are increased because you're looking for it. And so if you create this set of symptoms, which is what a disorder is, right? It's the symptom cluster, that's how we do it. And you go looking for that set of symptoms, and all of a sudden you start seeing the symptoms. Like, this is exactly the phenomena of you are like, oh my God, my toe hurts. And you go to WebMD and you walk away saying, oh my God, I have stage 3 multistatic renal cancer. I had no idea that was a toe hurting. I didn't. That's the WebMD phenomenon, right? That's what I mean by painting a bullseye after you shoot the arrow. So there is this long set of research. It is upheld enough to the point where these really smart people say, yes, it is a disorder. And yes, there are still concerns, even in that body of people saying, is it really though? So that's simple question, complex answer.
So coming from a world of knowing internet gamers and being a gamer of yourself, like, do you think that this is going to be a very difficult issue for any clinical psychologists or psychiatrists who don't have experience with gamers and don't work with them? That's
probably my number one critique right now of the disorder and I don't have a really good way. I like to put things in analogies because it just makes it a little more understandable. Because if I just talk about like, well, there's these cultural considerations about it, it becomes very difficult when you have to blah, 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 then it gets lost. And so maybe the easiest thing I can think of is taking one of us and dropping us in Japan. And just expecting us to be able to fit in with the culture there, unless you've gone and you've studied it and you've read up on it and you know pieces of the language and you understand that there's certain things that translate from the United States, and then there's certain things that if they're common in the US but highly offensive in Japan. And that's probably the best analogy I have. The people who are making these decisions about this disorder I'm not convinced that they understand the culture behind it. They're creating this set of symptoms without understanding the context in which those symptoms exist. And I do think that is a big issue.
Yeah, I do too.
In an age where, well, I guess, in our culture, we've got a ton of there's probably 10 streamers right now racing to get server first level 40 in World of Warcraft Classic. And those guys are going to be up probably for close to 48 hours straight, like no sleep.
Easy.
Trying to get level 40 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But,
And we deal with a lot of criticism and a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes. I mean, I've been dealing with it my entire life. Anybody who isn't a gamer and knows that I am or finds out that I am either has made fun of me or just kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And I mean, a great example of that is I used to work at a furniture store as a sales associate. I was, I sold furniture. That was one of my jobs. And I did not look like a gamer when I was dressed up in my formal attire, selling fancy furniture. And I worked there for a good 6 months before one of my coworkers found out that I was in a raid group for World of Warcraft. And their mouths just fell open and looked at me like I had just revealed that I had a third arm that I had never shown them. And it was such a disconnect, a mental disconnect. And they actually treated me differently after that. And sometimes it's a good different, like they have more respect for me, or they don't and they go, oh, she's weird.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, I feel like as gamers and as the audience who is listening to this show, we deal with this stereotype and misconception of what a gamer and who a gamer is for our entire lives. And we kind of get this wall up, right? You like expect people to make fun of you for wanting to be playing your first WoW expansion in 2 years and staying up all night and all the things that people tweet with pictures like Coffee was just talking about with the race to server first.
Mm-hmm.
We think it's a cool event. Everybody else says you are a deadbeat.
What are you doing?
But it's so interesting because these people, this is their job too.
Yeah.
So
yes,
it's not like they're doing this, they're doing it for fun, but it's not necessarily just, for themselves. They're doing it to support their family at this point too. It's so interesting. Like, where does that fall in this line of, a disorder if this person's at work? He's working hard.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to me.
So talk a little bit about that, Romedy, because I've heard people who have clarified that's a very specific thing. Like, if you're gaming 12 hours a day for a job as your primary income, that's not internet gaming disorder, but a lot of people would think you're nuts.
Right. So that's actually So we have a study that's actually going to run this fall. I was going to have it run this past spring. And unfortunately, the cancellation of HGC completely obliterated my participant pool because I had 3 organizations that were online on board for doing this study with me, and so we had to postpone it. But in the fall, we're going to, because Ohio is kind of this hotbed for esports, we've got a couple different universities that are online with us who are going to essentially track the amount of time their professional players spend in a virtual environment. And that's the big, I think, key there, because in a virtual environment is different than being online, is different than being at the computer. Those are 3 completely separate things. And the disorder treats all of those things as the same. And to me, they're radically different. And so we really have to, one, take that into account.
Wait, does that include social media?
So social media is not included in a virtual environment. That's considered its own little subcategory of being online. And it's specifically categorized as online because you can do it on multiple platforms. You can do it on your phone, your tablet, your computer, whatever it is, right? You can do it all across all these different places. And so social media time gets categorized as online time.
Okay.
Virtual environment time is the actual, you start the clicker when you turn the game on and it's loading up, and you turn the timer off when you hit exit game. And those 2 things are different themselves from time spent at a computer.
Right.
And that can be answering emails, or that can be at your job, right? And so the big thing that we're trying to drive at here is if you work at an office, like a lot of us do now, and you're on a computer there, you are on the computer 6 hours, 75%, 70% of your time there, right? On your job. Well, if you are a streamer or a professional gamer and that's your job, you might spend legitimately 10 to 12 hours in a virtual environment every day. But your overall computer time may not be that high when you subtract out the virtual environment time, right? It may only be 7 or 5% of your overall professional time. Now, if you are doing 70% of your computer time at your job and then you come home and you're casually play games, those two values, when you start adding them together, do not look different, right? If you are a professional gamer, if you play games for a living as a streamer or a professional tournament player, a team, whatever, your time put together may not look all that different from your average white collar job. And so that's why it's so important that we have these three categories split apart. The current iteration of the diagnosis does not split those things apart. It just says problematic problematic internet use is the verbatim wording for it. So it's problematic internet use. Well, what does that mean? And that means something radically different in multiple contexts. So one thing that I wanted to make sure I talked about real quick, and this is a good place to do it. My major concern is with adolescence. And here's why. Once you turn 18 in a majority of countries, once you turn 18, you can make decisions for yourself about your therapy, about your medication, about your medical history. All of that stuff becomes your lawful right at the age of 18. If you have a 16 or 17-year-old, and we'll just pull Fortnite, how many hundreds of 16 or 17-year-olds are actively trying to go pro in that game? Dropping out of school to pursue professional gaming, right? Well, if they have a parent or a legal guardian who decides that they don't want their child to do this and that this is problematic, interfering with their life, they have the legal right to now force that diagnosis, where it may not be appropriate at all because of what is going on, because of what the goal is there, right? And this gets further compounded by and this will be the second big part of the show, and I want to save this for its own chunk. But the way we view this internet diagnosis is through the lens of a behavioral addiction. It's actually the very first diagnosis that is categorized as a behavioral addiction. We need to parse that apart and understand what in the world that means, because that's how the criteria for the disorder is created. And just based on the timeline, the concerns I have about the time, like I just told to you, I am not convinced it fits there. Well, we have to all understand the addictive side of it to go there, but that's part 2 of the show. So
Okay. Yeah, because I feel like we are in a world right now where in esports, it's absolutely the norm where a professional player is doing 12-hour days, 16-hour days playing the game, and they love doing it, but you know, let's be real, ladies and gentlemen. If you're playing the game 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day, you're probably not doing a whole lot of other things that would be considered quote unquote adulting or normal or whatever. You know, you can't really hold down a job. You're probably not making a lot of time for earning money unless you're streaming. You're probably not going to the grocery store and having relationships with other people. And so a lot of people would look at that and say, well, that's freaking abnormal and that's broken and you're sick in the head.
So I'm going to push you just a little bit here. I think this is an offline conversation that we've had once before, but let's take some of the basic criteria for a major depressive episode. And let's apply it to the situation that you just posited. Let's say we have somebody who's at the grind 16 hours a day, trying to get into Overwatch or Fortnite or League of Legends or WoW Classic, whatever you want it to be, right? Well, let's just go through the criteria for that depressive episode. Are you sleeping enough? Probably not. What is your eating like? Have you significantly lost or gained weight, defined as a 5% change in your overall BMI? Your overall body weight. Well, maybe, right? If you're not getting up and moving around, that can get classified by somebody who doesn't understand gaming culture as what's referred to as psychomotor retardation, or just a slowdown, a reduction in your overall mobility, right? If you're not socializing, you may not be having as much fun. You may be more irritable. So if I'm not initiated, if I don't
But isn't
understand the
online gaming all
culture,
about socializing? Aren't they
mm,
socializing in some way?
so your brain doesn't treat it the same. Oh God, we're going down this rabbit hole. Okay,
Yeah,
coffee,
we're
I see
going.
you. All right, I see you. This is good. No. So and there's very early research on this, and the research is not good. So take this with a grain of salt, okay? Because it's really difficult to measure neurotransmitter, and I'm not convinced that traditional ways that we monitor your overall physiology change, like your heart rate, your sweat rate, that I'm not convinced those are good measures for this particular topic. But the early research suggests that your brain does not treat socializing online in the same manner as it treats socializing in person. And the primary mechanism for that difference is your dopamine release. Now, this is really important because we're going to come back to your dopamine system in part 2 when we talk about addiction. Okay. But the primary way human beings gain a huge portion of their dopamine is through social activities. When you go out and you see other people, you do other things with other human beings, you're priming your dopamine system. And this, if we're going to assume evolution is, I live in Kansas right now. Okay, I have to preface this with we're assuming evolution is a thing. I'm not saying it is, we're just assuming it's a thing for the moment. Okay. So, you're historically like this, evolutionarily speaking, your dopamine system is primed for this social activity. This is who we are as creatures, right? This is who we are as
Mhm.
humans. Also consider the activities you do when you socialize. You do things like eating, dancing, going to concerts, playing board games, just those kind of activities. You do something outdoorsy or athletic, right? All of that stuff contributes to your overall dopamine gain. When you socialize online, you can do things that are fun, but you're losing approximately 70% of that dopamine gain because you're not engaging in the behaviors, you're not engaging in other pieces outside of just in what the game gives you, and then just the baseline from socializing with another human being. So
Wait, you guys don't
that,
dance when you play online games? This is weird.
I mean, I don't dance ever, but that's entirely you,
I'm
right?
confused.
I know my limitations, right? I won't sing, I won't dance. I will play the instrument in the background. You can dance to that. That's how this is
Beautiful, beautiful.
You know, that statement, if I was not, a moderate-minded person and, try to think of all the sides, that statement that you just made earlier, Ramadi, would be something that would bristle me up and be like, what the hell? That's bullshit. I have great times with my friends online,
You
blah, blah,
do.
blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
And but you know what? I mean, maybe even 5 years ago, I would have fought you to the nth degree and said that's wrong, that's wrong. But I cannot deny that as wonderful as my time is spending with my friends online, like I crave being able to see them at BlizzCon and being in their presence.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it is just not the same, and we do say that all the time. Yeah, it's not the
Right.
same when we go back home, but we kind of convince ourselves that it's enough, that it's okay. Like we still have our time online. It's just to see you later, but it's definitely not the same, at least in my opinion. What do you guys think?
I've got a straight answer, but mine's long. So
It's
if you want to
different
get
for
into
me.
it,
Yeah, I mean, playing a video game offline and streaming is also a different thing. Like if you're streaming,
Yeah.
I feel like it's a different type of socialization. There's definitely a lot more wheels turning in my head. I feel like I'm more active in the socialization. I'm getting up. I'm probably moving around.
Mhm.
But yeah, if I'm playing a video game offline, that feels different. Even if I'm speaking with someone in Discord or socializing in
Yeah.
that way, then being face to face with them, having that human interaction.
Yeah.
Well, and a thing that I want you to think about here for the two of you is, and anybody who's listening, and I mean, this is a good thought exercise for you. What are the games that you play? Like, give me examples of the games that you play when you are playing to socialize. What are those games?
Well, Heroes of the Storm, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
World of
Maybe.
Warcraft.
Yeah, I was
World
gonna
of
say
Warcraft.
WoW Classic, right? So I know Final
Yeah.
Fantasy 14 for a lot of people I follow on Twitter is a big deal right now. You might play Apex Legends, you might play League of Legends, you might play Fortnite, you might play any of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
The models for all of those social games that we just listed is what we call a variable ratio reinforcement schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to break that down. But what this schedule refers to, we're once again going back to your dopamine system, okay? So schedules can either be variable or fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And fixed schedules get boring, right? Like we love our routine because it's comfortable, but you have to switch up your routine every now and again. And when you switch up your routine, man, does it feel good, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference between a fixed and a variable reinforcement schedule. It's nice to know I'm going to get paid every 2 weeks. That's a good feeling, right? But it's nice to go out every once in a while to drink and dance and socialize and eat. That's variable, and that stuff feels amazing. Your
Mm-hmm.
brain gives you a bigger dopamine reward in a variable schedule versus a fixed schedule. So you get
Mm-hmm.
more dopamine out of it being unpredictable, is what I want you to get at. Now,
Yep.
the ratio, there's either a time delay or a ratio delay, right? So a time delay means every 4 hours or something you get rewarded for it. A ratio delay means more unpredictability. It may be the seventh try, it may be the 20th try. If you're in my Diablo 3 season right now, I think I'm on the 79th try to get the bracers that I need for my Johanna. And I cannot get the damn thing to drop, right?
Yep.
So it's going to be a huge dopamine reward when those bracers drop. That's why I go back and do it, because I know how it's going to feel, right? So all
Mm-hmm.
of those games we just listed are a variable ratio reinforcement schedule for your dopamine. Well, every game in a casino operates on a variable reinforcement schedule.
Yep.
A slot machine, variable reinforcement schedule. Blackjack, poker, variable ratio schedule. Sorry. You don't know when you're going to get rewarded, but when you do, it feels incredible. That drop you're trying to get from I don't know, Ragnaros and Molten Core that won't drop. Oh man, does it feel good when you get it, right? One of the two
Yeah.
bindings for Wind Fury that won't drop from Baron Geddon. Oh, does it feel good when it drops?
Maybe that's why
Yeah.
I'm bored with World of Warcraft Live right now, because I know that my reward always comes on Tuesday when I open that loot box.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Or that you've
Why?
been trying for that one mount for years and years and years. Like
Yes.
I never got the
Yes.
headless horseman mount, and I tried every year for 9 years, couldn't get it. But then I wound up getting a phoenix mount with the second try. So exactly, like
Get the hell out
damn
of here,
lucky, right?
Jules.
I know, get the hell out of
There's your
here.
RNG right there.
Exactly, but but that's the thing, is it sends us back in
Yep.
time and time again to try
Well,
again to see what our luck is, damn my luck, bless
yep.
RNG or whatever.
Well, so this one will bake your noodle, right? Take.
Mhm.
I just gave you variable ratio. Every loot box system in the world, every microtransaction in games, is that system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, is this the place where we can go into the addiction side, because I think that
Yes.
is a great transition point.
Yeah. So this is like one of the great stories, I think, of the 20th century, and it's not a story that gets told often. And I'm just glancing at the time because I need to condense this down, because this is the history that I have dove into, and it boggles my mind that this is not better known, but it also doesn't surprise me that it's not better known.
Mhm.
So today we have two different models of addiction. The first one is called the chemical hooks theory of addiction, and this is the theory that dominated the 20th century. The second theory is the trauma isolation theory of addiction, and that's a more modern and more recent movement toward addictions research, and it's really only in the last 7-10 years here. So and this is one of those, you just told me a little bit ago, Jules, that 5 years ago you would have railed against me. Here's a thing that I'm going to tell you based in history and research, and you're going to rail against this one because this is how ingrained it is in our society, right? The chemical hooks theory of addiction explains perhaps 17% of addictions.
Mhm.
17. So roughly 1 in 5. Let's round up. We'll call it 1 in 5 of addicts that you would see out in the world can be explained through chemical hooks. Now, how do we know this? Well, there's through multiple studies on multiple substances a trend that emerges. For example, nicotine smoking is maybe the most obvious. It's a thing that's legal most everywhere. Well, if you are a cigarette addict, we'd like to tell ourselves that you were addicted from moment one. And I'm gonna in a moment I'll come back and define what I mean by addicted there because we don't have a definition for that yet. So from the first time you have smoked a cigarette, you have become addicted to it, and so you need to continue smoking, right? So recently, we have taken to any number of nicotine substitutes, like a nicotine patch, gum, whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
Well, about 17% of the population can use those substitutes to successfully quit smoking. I'll say that a different way. About 17% of the population can use the substance, the chemical hook, by substituting the chemical hook to successfully quit smoking.
Mhm.
If the chemical hooks theory told the entire story, that would be much closer to 90 or 95%.
Yeah.
This trend is the same across it's roughly the same across multiple substances and across countries. And here are I'll give you 3 real world examples where chemical hooks fails. Okay. The first one is in Switzerland. Now, Switzerland is about as conservative as you can possibly get within Europe. Okay. It is your uncle with the MAGA hat who is super racist. That's basically Switzerland. Now, I can say that because my family is from Switzerland. Okay, so I am Swiss. I can say that. I don't actually know, but yeah. Anyway, so um, in Switzerland in 2001, what they did is they decriminalized most substances, including heroin. I'm sorry, Switzerland. The big tell out of Switzerland is cocaine. I'm sorry. So in Switzerland, cocaine is a substance that radically alters your brain chemistry. We like to tell ourselves. And from moment one, you are addicted to cocaine. Well, in Switzerland, by decriminalizing the substance, what they have done is they have allowed doctors to now prescribe cocaine to addicts. Instead of addicts having to do it illegally in places that are dirty and unsafe, Switzerland has built safe injection sites that are monitored by medical doctors and nurses. The addict will go there 2 to 3 times a day. They will get their prescription from the pharmacist who has made pure cocaine, not cocaine that's been cut with whatever we know on the street. And then they inject safely using a clean needle under the supervision of a nurse. Then they go back to work. Now, what Switzerland has done is they have subsidized companies to hire addicts. So if you were a mechanic before you became a criminal as an addict, now Switzerland will say, well, hey, if this mechanic shop will hire this mechanic who was previously an addict, we will pay 65% of their salary.
Wow.
All of this, providing the injection site, supplementing nurses and doctors for pay, subsidizing their payment through job, is about 12% the cost of having to imprison them. That's how Switzerland sold, and incidentally, this is how Washington State in the U.S. has passed some decriminalization on different substances. This very same method. Now, what happened in Switzerland was exactly everybody's worst fears for about the first 6 months. Addicts would take more and more and more of the substance. Their dosages went up. They wanted more of it, and that's exactly what all the opposition predicted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Between the 6-month mark and the 2.5-year mark, what happens is the addicts, on their own, without pressure from the state, decide to stop using. Roughly 80% of the addicts will stop using. The other 20%, and this lines up with our chemical hooks data from earlier, roughly 20% of them continue to use, but they drastically reduce their dose to something like 1/8 to 1/10 of their street dose. They do this voluntarily, and the magic number is 2.5 years. So, one real world example. I'll go quickly through these other two because they look very similar to that one. Portugal, in the late 1980s, they had a dictatorship fall. Between the 80s and the 90s, Portugal watched their heroin addiction go to roughly 1% of the population. That is a staggering percentage to be addicted to heroin.
Mm-hmm.
They not only decriminalized drugs, they legalized everything. You can do whatever you want in Portugal. Now, they followed very similar patterns to what I just described for you in Switzerland, and the data is roughly the same. About 80% of addicts after 2.5 years will voluntarily stop using. The other 20% continue their monitored dosages at roughly 1/8 to 1/10 of their street dose. The other thing that we get from Portugal that's hyper important to mention is if you say you own a bar and you want to celebrate the end of each month, you want to celebrate your earnings, you want to give back to your community a little bit, you might host a cocaine party. And you might invite your friends and some of your patrons to your bar. And in Portugal, you will call the police and you'll say, hey, we're going to have a cocaine party on this night. Just wanted to let you know. If you want to pop in the next morning and make sure everybody is okay, that'd be great. And the police will do precisely that. It's notable in Portugal that the police will also go out looking for addicts, not to arrest them, but to make sure that they are injecting safely, that they have access to clean needles, etc., that they're doing all right. If they want to come in for access to these social programs, they sure as heck can, but you don't have to. If you want to continue to live there where you are, great, go ahead and do that. So the data from Portugal and Switzerland are roughly the same. Now, you can say those are European countries, Mr. Wannabe psychologist guy. Well, you know what? The United States did the trial before anybody else ever did the trial. It was called the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. This was the second war in memory. I don't remember if there was a draft for the Korean War, but if there was a draft, it was very small and short. For the Vietnam War, we fought the draft, right? You didn't want to go fight over there. We didn't understand what we were doing. Well, we took all of these people out of their normal lives, shipped them over to Vietnam. Roughly 0.7% of the U.S. Army that went over to Vietnam were addicts prior to going over there. While they were there, some data suggest up to 90% of the U.S. Army was taking some form of opium. Mm-hmm. Wow. 65% is probably the right number, but some like to cite 90%. Now, if the chemical hooks theory was right, all of those people would have come back to the U.S. and been addicts. Mm-hmm. And it's true that the percentage pre and post Vietnam War was higher, about 0.7% versus about 1.2% of the Army after the Vietnam War. That's way different than 65%. So if the chemical hooks theory was right, those people would have come back opium addicts and they would never have been able to go back into their lives without opium. And they did. So that's why we don't think chemical hooks works anymore. That's why we think about 1 in 5 addictions is truly some kind of chemical imbalance for that particular individual. And guess what? The best way to medicate that is give them the substance. What did addicts do prior to 1914? Well, one, we didn't call them addicts. That wasn't a word. We didn't have that in our vernacular, right? If you were addicted to a substance prior to 1914, you went to 1918. You went to your local pharmacist. They made you your substance of choice, put it into something. An example is Sally's Soothing Elixir, which was about 2 parts per million of heroin. And you took your substance for a couple pennies. That's what you did. You still worked and you were you're part of the community. You had a good life. You weren't an outcast, right? Mm-hmm. So all of that is to set up this talk of addiction that we want to have, because my second big concern is that we're positioning internet gaming disorder as a behavioral addiction.
Yeah.
And that is really, really concerning based on the way we have treated other addictions. One, we have not understood it. Two, there are major forces that are still in play today. As an example, I cannot label the research I do as addictions research. I have to label my research as behavioral. If I label it as addictions, I lose any government funding that I have. The government will not fund addictions research in the United States. So I have to do behavioral research. Yeah. If I get a result that is addictions adjacent, I have to be really careful about the journals I want to publish in because of that loss of funding. So there are massive systems in place that want us to believe it's chemical hooks. We want us to believe it's some issue with the addict themselves. This is genetic. This is some moral failing of theirs. And it's not true. It's just not true. And I'm seeing those same forces start to play themselves out with internet gaming disorder. So that's why that story, I think, is so important to be told right now. That's why we have to know that story.
Yeah. I have a story of my own that I think is relevant to this. And back when probably about 5 years ago, I worked for a company where one of my coworkers was in her late 40s at the time, and she had a friend whose son was around 17. And this friend was really struggling with her son because he was very very depressed, and he was very unresponsive to things. He was just in his room all the time, not motivated to do his schoolwork, all of those kinds of things. But the only thing that made him excited was to play Halo. That was the thing he was the most excited about. And his mother felt that he played way, way, way too much Halo and would punish him by taking Halo away.
The one thing that makes him feel good. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so the my coworker actually asked me some questions on behalf of her friend, because she's like, well, gaming and you understand all this stuff. And I said, has she ever spoken to her son about the gaming things that he does and what he's involved in? And she was like, no, she just thinks that he's doing this too much. He needs to focus on other things and to be more mature and, focus on his studies. Well, I said to her, I said, I really feel like you need to encourage her to have a conversation with her son and learn about what he's doing. Turns out that this 17-year-old kid, was making YouTube videos with an audience of 100,000 tutorials. He was a clan leader, and on a major clan leader, and was doing all of this stuff. Yes, he was dealing with depression and a lot of issues, but he was super successful in the realm, and his mom had zero idea.
And didn't want to know.
She didn't want to know. And so after I had encouraged her, my coworker, to tell her friend to talk to her son, and she found and she told me the story, and I freaked out. I was like, do you know how huge this is? Do you understand how accomplished he is? He's supervising other people. He's leading them. And and she had no idea. She had no clue. And I just loved the fact that I was able to help the situation, at least, because she gained a better understanding. And her son actually went to therapy and started, getting some treatment because he had untreated depression.
Yeah.
But this story is so many times that I have run into where gamers are assumed to be lazy, uncooperative, unfocused, just not productive members of society. Yeah. And I feel like every single day we, even the job that I work at right now, some of them have been gamers in the past and they understand gaming, but they don't get what I do when I get home, and they have no interest in any of it, because it's just whatever your stuff that you're doing.
Well, so what is it that, sorry, and this is always so I work primarily with adolescents, not to potentially cut you off. But I when I get the parent that says that, well, he just goes home and does this, I'm like, well, what do you go home and do?
Yeah, exactly.
And you get those lists, and then my next, it's just this nice, easy juxtaposition, because okay, so you're placing the things that you're doing as morally superior to the things that your child or whoever is doing. So I need you to go ahead and justify that to me, right? And it's in the justification process where it starts to break down. Because then you start to realize, well, these are things that I like and enjoy, and they're good for me, and they make me feel good. It's like, okay, well, how is that any different from what that person's doing? And that cognitive dissonance. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and the thing about it that I see is that we as gamers sometimes throw that back into people's faces. I see this a lot with, you sit and watch football from noon until noon until 10 p.m. on a Sunday, and nobody blinks a frickin' eye at you.
Right.
And I just, go ahead.
Amar is saying that, especially working in the gaming industry, even having a job in the gaming industry is not seen as a real job sometimes.
Yeah. And even my family in the beginning hadn't really understood what it was that I was doing as a podcaster when I first began, and thought it was kind of silly and kind of not
Why
doing
would you
anything.
do
And
that? Why do you want to do
right, exactly, until
Right.
they saw how people, they actually saw it, chat rooms, and understood the audience and the people that we were
Hmm.
lives that we were touching, and it was very eye opening to them. But I think I would love to get some of your tips and thoughts about how we as a gaming culture can help combat some of this stereotype side of things. That suggestion of, well, how do you spend your time is amazing. What else can you give us?
Yeah.
I want to know, Romney,
So,
like, if you look
yeah.
at me, like, would you diagnose me with the disorder?
Oh man. Okay. So, wow. Again, you're really good at asking simple questions that have these big complex answers. You just cut right into the middle of it, right? So, okay. So my mm, I'm going to tread on the toes of people who work in this industry. For anybody who's uninitiated, if you go and you see a therapist or a counselor, there's 5 different degrees and licensures that you might actually go see, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you might see a psychiatrist who's a medical doctor. They're what differentiates them is they can prescribe medications. I went into clinical psychology because I have exactly zero desire to deal with medications. I want to do talk therapy and behavioral modification. That's what I wanted to do. Medications have their place. Behavioral and talk therapy has its place. Sometimes combining them together is great. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I did not want to do meds. I had no desire.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I went to clinical psych. There's counseling psychology, which and ADHD is the best example I can give you for the difference in a clinical and a counseling psychologist. Me, the clinical, and I'm throwing myself under the bus because I don't really do it this way. But me, the clinical psychologist, thinks about the deficits of ADHD. Well, they can't sit still. They're probably up and running around. They're going to have problems concentrating. They're limited in the amount of time they focus on a task. Those are deficits. And that's how clinical psychologists and medical doctors see the world. Counseling psychologists are going to take that same client and they're going to say, well, they obviously have a lot of energy and they can get more done in the day than the average person can, and they maybe have to sleep less. They've got a higher metabolism, maybe. So those are all of the things, the strength side of it. So that's the difference in a clinical and a counseling psychologist. Well, those 3 other
Okay.
degrees. The other 2, you can see a nurse practitioner some of the times. Nurse practitioners are wonderful for meds. If you can't see a psychiatrist, they don't really have any talk training therapy. Social workers are the biggest variable you can get because there are legitimately amazing social workers out there and they have different unique training in the systems of government and support.
Mm-hmm.
And the overall majority of social workers don't get great education. That doesn't mean they're not great clinicians. They have to go do that on their own. Social work
Mm-hmm.
is a 2-year program and it's just really condensed, and you're just not setting social workers up to be successful. So
So you're
here's
saying
this
that
huge,
people from these varying different, walks of
yes,
education are probably going to diagnose this differently.
way
It's like,
differently. Yeah, and
yeah.
that's the complexity behind it. So it matters who you go see, right? So Coffee, let's see, you say you see me, right?
Okay.
Well, to me, this diagnosis is what I call a diagnosis of exclusion. That means I have to rule out everything else that comes above it in the hierarchy of diagnosis.
I
So
see.
where am I going to start? I'm going to start with depression, anxiety, and trauma. If I can rule out all of that stuff, then we're going to go into personality. If I can rule out personality, then we're going to go into personality disruption. If I can't tag personality disruption, then we're going to go into general life upheaval. If I can't tag anything in general life upheaval, now I will consider internet gaming disorder as a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
My view is that the majority of the symptomology in internet gaming disorder is a manifestation of other symptoms. It is
Mm-hmm.
Right
not
there.
the root cause.
Mm-hmm.
Right there. That is exactly what I believe as well. And
Now,
I'm sure there are cases that it's not exactly that, but for the
right,
majority of the time, it's the symptom, not the actual problem.
correct. Now, with all that said, the way in which you treat things, as the clinical psychologist that I'm trying to be, what I'm interested in is outcomes. And sometimes, to me, as a clinician, I don't care about your diagnosis. I think it's a really poor example of who you are a person. I think a diagnosis is a great way for me to communicate with other people who look like me and do my job, or for me to communicate with your insurance. Other than that, diagnosis, in my view, loses all of its relevance. And this
Mm-hmm.
is the most brilliant example. One of the first clients I ever saw came in and she had issues pulling her hair. She just had no eyebrows. She had some bald spots in the front of her hair from pulling it. All that time, she had bald patches on her arms. I came back in with the treatment manual for this particular diagnosis called trichotillomania, and in the very first page of that treatment manual, it said about 1 in 400 people suffer from this particular diagnosis, and that for her was enough. That was treatment. She was totally fine with it after that. When she realized that on the Washburn campus there were roughly 18 other individuals who struggled with exactly what she struggled with, it no longer was a problem.
Yeah.
That was it. So that's why it was a complex question, right? If you come to me and you, the adult, say, I think I have an issue with internet gaming disorder. Well, all right. If that's the lens through which you want to view your treatment, then that's the vehicle that we're going to go down treatment with. Now, I'm still going to look at things like personality, depression, anxiety, and trauma, but I may not use that language if that's not the language you want to use, right?
Yeah.
If you want to view it through the gaming lens, then that's great. That's what we'll do. If you come to me and you say, my friends tell me that I might be depressed, well, do you think you're depressed? Well, no. Okay, well, what brought you in here then? And that the answer to that question is what is so powerful, because that tells me how I need to view what's going on.
Yeah.
So, would I look at you? I wouldn't look at anybody and say you look like it's this or that or the other thing, right? If you want to list off your symptomology, all
Mm-hmm.
you're doing is telling me what is the most important or the most distressing stuff to you. Well, then I'm just going to target that stuff. If I have to talk to your insurance company, yeah, I'm going to have a diagnosis. And that to me is where the utility of that diagnosis stops.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that makes sense. Gotcha.
I think it's hard for us as gamers because we are often we have similar traits in a lot of ways for many
Mm-hmm.
of us where we have social anxiety or discomfort in social situations, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe gaming is kind of, I know when I ran a mega guild in World of Warcraft, one of the rules that we had is that the real world shouldn't really enter into guild chat because that's not the place for it.
Mm.
That guild chat and the world you're going in there is the place to get away from it all. So there's
Right.
two sides of this question. One of them is, when we when we use gaming as a refuge from our problems, from our
Mm-hmm.
struggles,
Mm-hmm.
and when it becomes too much. Because I think we can all probably think of somebody in our heads that
Yep.
we know that has gone too much.
Yep. So, and this is the core. Like in the event that I get to go out and do training seminars on internet gaming disorder, this question right here is going to form the core of that training seminar. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
is this is really, it just cuts to the heart of the issue for me. So I want to present you. I planned for this. I want to present you a couple of clients. Okay. So one of them has grown up in a household that's very outgoing. They, multiple brothers, sisters, lots of social activities, and then all of a sudden we've retreated. That individual has retreated into gaming, and it starts taking up more and more and more of their time. And other activities have now gone by the wayside. School grades in school start to falter. Things like hygiene start to fall off. We're no longer showering, brushing our teeth, deodorant, that kind of stuff is not happening. We're not washing clothes. We're not coming to meals. There's precipitous weight loss. That is what pops into my head as something to be concerned about.
Right.
The gaming itself is not, to me, the concern. This is the manifestation of the discomfort.
Yeah.
Um, and the other side to this that I want to give you is, let's say that, and that first one fits me, by the way. The second one, I
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily have anybody in mind, but let's say you grew up in a family where your parents, this is my wife's, more accurate, my wife's family actually, where your dad was into computers from day one. And oh, did he love computers? And he had an Atari, and he had a Nintendo the first day it came out, an Apple II GS, and a Mac, everything. And your mom was all into this stuff too, and loved the mobile stuff, Game Boys and Dr. Mario. She had a Sega. I can't remember the name of that original on the go thing, but she had the Sega version of it, and is always, well, if you come from that background and then you go out into the world, your background is abnormal from the world. And so the world is going to look into you and say, what's wrong with you? And you're saying, there is nothing wrong with me. This is my family.
Yes.
Now, those two things, in terms of the clinician, are precisely the same based on the the way the disorder is written right now. And that, I'm sorry, is insanity. It's just insanity. It can't be that way. So what I want to take a moment to flesh out is that abnormal piece that you brought up there, but I want to describe a little bit better the trauma isolation view of addiction that we have. When you and this is going to ignore the 1 in 5 that is the chemical hooks reality. Okay, we're going to ignore that. So this is the other 80% of that population. Well, if you take that 80% and you poll them, which is hard to do. This is not great data because addicts are they're not really they're wary of research and law enforcement and blah blah blah. So, but if you poll that 80%, the correlation, and this is an absurd correlation, is 0.92. Any of my stats people out there know that is almost unheard of, and it's absolutely almost unheard of in the research world. It's so insanely high. Of those 80% of people, 92% of them have some history of childhood trauma or abuse.
Wow.
That's utter insanity. And that's only substance use and abuse, right? We're not covering other things, other manifestations of this, which is ludicrous. Yeah. So let's consider that person for a moment. And the question, the reason I'm having you go do this really uncomfortable thought exercise with me is I want you to answer this question. How do I expect this person to behave any other way? That's what I want you to answer. How does this person behave any other way? So trauma, which is the other area of specialty for me, and briefly, trauma disrupts 5 very important things, and it's this very important acronym. It's this acronym STEIP. I have to put it in chat, otherwise I can't say it. But it interrupts your feelings of safety, trust, intimacy, empathy, and power. And this is true of the soldier who goes into a combat zone and experiences something horrific. And it's true of the individual who experiences chronic complex trauma as a child. That's a new term that's coming into vogue, chronic complex trauma. Well, if I don't ever feel safe, if I don't think I can trust anybody, empathy in the psychiatric definition is being able to see from someone else's emotional perspective. So I can't do that because I've never learned my own emotional well-being. I'm never intimate with anybody, meaning I can't get close in a meaningful capacity. And I don't feel like I am powerful, so I don't have control of my own life. Those are the 5 things that trauma disrupts and interrupts. So as a child, you're trying to see the world through the lens of those 5 things. When do I feel safe? How do I learn to trust? How can I be close to other people? How can I be in control of my world, right? Chronic complex trauma as a child, you never learn that stuff. Yeah. So you turn to other things to avoid those feelings of emotional pain, right? That's what you're avoiding through your substance use or your alcohol use or whatever else it is, right? Now, I'm going to posit to you that gaming does fall on this spectrum, which is a difficult, uncomfortable thing for us to look at. But it's at the less dangerous end of it. Like, it's on the way less destructive end, because I could choose to go out and do heroin, right? If I'm a guy, then I'm oftentimes going to be violent or involved in the drug trade, and if I'm a girl, I'm going to be involved in the sex trafficking somehow. That's the percentages. I'm just straight playing percentages there. If you are a heroin addict, you're likely to be in one of those professions if, right, boy or girl. So gaming falls on that spectrum, and this is why I'm so interested in the time you spend in a virtual world. Because this is your escape. This is your avoidance of having to feel your own emotional pain. Now, we talked a little bit ago about in social environments, you receive your dopamine, right? And how gaming worlds have been set up to follow this variable basically this unpredictable means of getting your dopamine. Well, if you don't feel safe or trust anybody, you're not powerful. The gaming world offers you the chance to learn that stuff. The
Yeah.
problem is it doesn't carry over. So you only ever learn that I can get my dopamine from the substance of choice or my activity of choice, which in our
Right.
conversation is gaming, right? Well, that is not a dysfunction. That is not a disorder. That is you living the only life you have ever known how to live to the best of your ability, is
Mm-hmm.
precisely what that is. That is coping in your world. What
Yep.
needs to happen then is we need to go back and rebuild those 5 things that we shattered as a child. That's the same thing that you do with the other 80% of addicts.
Yeah.
You rebuild those 5 pieces and we reintegrate into society. It's not perfect.
Mhm.
It's a long process. It's very painful and it's hard to do. I'm not going to pretend it's anything other than that, right?
Yeah, I mean, with social anxiety, it's a great example. Like talk to pretty much anybody who is a clinician. They're gonna say the way that you overcome social anxiety is by exposing yourself to that thing that makes you
Right.
anxious,
Let's
right?
let's draw a line there real quick. Finish your thought, but I want to there's a we need to parse that apart a little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, because I mean that's what I've heard over and over again is like if
Hmm.
you're socially anxious and you want to become more social with other people, you're gonna have to put yourself out there and
Yes.
just push through
Go get
the
your
anxiety.
dopamine.
Right. Go
Yeah.
get your dopamine. So here's the and this is where we're gonna use the colloquial definition of social anxiety versus the psychiatric definition. And this is my
Okay.
issue because I exist in the psychiatric world, right?
Right.
Colloquially, when we say, "Well, I have social anxiety," what does that mean? Well, I'm uncomfortable in social situations. They make me feel nervous and anxious a little bit. I get in my own head. I'm worried that I did the wrong thing, right? Social anxiety disorder is the fear that I'm going to do something so bad socially that my life will end. That is the actual definition of social anxiety disorder, that I will die in this social thing if I do it
Mm-hmm.
wrong, right? Well, that just sets you up. So, true social anxiety disorder just sets you up for either I'm perfect or I fail. Well, I'm going
Yeah.
to assume you're a human being. If you're a human being, you're not perfect. So that means you always fail. So then you're never going to engage in anything social because that means the end of your life.
Right.
Why would you? So and the reason, so what you're talking about there is exposure therapy. And the
Right.
reason exposure therapy works is it takes this thing that is not objectively life threatening that you've paired with this fear reaction and it breaks that fear association and shows you that it's not actually life threatening, right? Well, what's
Yeah.
the worst thing that happens if you stumble over your words during a class presentation? Well, I mean,
Someone
really,
giggles.
what
I don't
happens?
know.
Right. I mean, right, exactly. Like, do you die? That's the catch. Do you
Yeah.
die? No, you don't actually die from that, right? Well,
Yeah.
and so this is where I wanted to draw that line, and I want to introduce the word introvert
Mm-hmm.
because you can be socially anxious and have it be not disordered. That's completely normal as a human being, right? You can have social anxiety disorder, which is a much more disruptive force, and then you have introvert. And the psychiatric definition for introvert is I recover my emotional energy from being alone.
Mm-hmm.
An extrovert recovers their emotional energy from being with other people. It's not that I have to have alone or quiet
Hmm.
time. It's that if I want to emotionally recover, I have to be alone for a little bit. I'm an introvert. I can talk all day long and I talk for a living. I'm with people all day long, right? I'm not particularly socially anxious because I've studied that stuff. But I still have to come home and be quiet and play Diablo for a little bit to cool down, right? To
Yep.
recover for myself. That's the difference. So those 3 things, I just want to make sure that we're clear about those 3 things right there. Because if you're
Yeah.
socially anxious in a non-disordered way, exposure therapy is not going to particularly help you. If you're
Right.
socially anxious in a disordered way, then yes, social anxiety, or then yes, absolutely, exposure therapy helps you. Like that's one of the disorders we really know how to treat.
Yeah, and so I guess the line gets kind of drawn into the situation of like, hey, I'm kind of lonely and I don't have any friends and I really don't like to go out and meet new friends, meet new people because it makes me super uncomfortable. So, the only way that I'm going to be able to overcome this is by doing the thing that I hate, which then is
Mm-hmm.
exposure therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But would that necessarily say you have social anxiety disorder if you're just basically saying, hey, I just don't like, because that's, hi, it me. Sometimes I'm just literally like, hey, I could probably go out there and meet some new people, and I ain't feeling that shit. Like, I ain't doing, but I'm
Canuck says
also an
it me as
introvert.
well.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I'm also an introvert too, so I'm just like, I mean, when I work at the office all day, I want to come home and just like not talk to anybody for the rest of the night. So
Totally
there's,
fine.
yeah, but I think we maybe don't understand the full process. Oh, hi, Thunder.
Oh.
To understand the full process of how all of this works and what we,
Mhm.
but I know that there have been a lot of people in my life in the past who have really just completely avoided that opportunity to socialize with people because they're too afraid, and therefore gaming is their only
Right.
outlet.
Yeah.
Well, so again, I want to consider the question: how do we expect folks to or to act any differently, right? So, if
Right.
you've had a social interaction that really was terrible, right, and as a child, you tend to view things until about the age of 9 or 10. You view things in true life or death fashion. You do not physically have brain anatomy to view the world in as anything other than life or death. So everything is life and death, right? It just that's the way it is. So if you have a social interaction that goes horribly for you, you do view that as life and death. And now that
Yeah.
does drive social anxiety down the road. Well, the only way to break that is to actually go ahead and do the thing and experience an outcome. And to be honest with you, as a therapist, I love it when outcomes are bad because then you experience that bad outcome and you're like, well, I'm still alive, and that really actually wasn't all that bad. And you know what? That person was kind of a jerk. I can't believe I gave them so much power over me in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, but if it's a reinforcing cycle. What I wanted to say, if you don't do the thing, then your anxiety goes down temporarily and you feel good about it. But then when you have to do that thing again, your anxiety just skyrockets. But then you're more likely to do the thing that you did before, which is avoid.
Yeah.
Right? Humans and children especially are so good at avoiding. Like you are pros at avoiding. It's really true.
That is true.
I'm avoiding those bills on my table right now, but that's a whole different
I was gonna
story.
say
That's a dopamine reward,
how long did I
Jules. That's
avoid
a
doing my
dopamine
taxes?
reward.
We've got some questions from the
Yeah.
chat room,
Yeah.
so we'll bring them in, and I think then we can get you on your way because I know we've kept you long already.
Well, I'm
Um,
long-winded. That's my fault too.
no, you're the best. Deadly2469 says, "What do you think about people that use video games to help others out because you can't help out as much in real life?"
So one, kudos to you for being willing to be there for somebody. And I'm going to go to the extreme example. I'm sure you don't mean this, Deadly, but I'm going to take an extreme example here. If you do have someone who's an addict in your life, whether it's a substance user, a gambler, a gamer, whatever truly disordered person that might be, support and loving and care and reliably being there for them. That is the single best thing you can ever do for the addicts in your life. And it's absolutely against everything we have been taught, right? We operate on this view that we're going to punish the addiction out of you. And here's your mind blower for the day. Punishment is a great predictor of short-term behavior, and it does not predict long-term behavior at all. All punishment makes you good at is avoiding and not getting caught. So if you're trying to punish people in your life, the only thing you're doing is training them how to not get caught by you. And then when you
Yeah.
do get caught, it's just the cycle all over again.
Hmm.
So punishment doesn't work. It never has. It works for children under the age of 9 because, again, life and death. That's why
Yeah.
punishment stops working for children around age 10. And adults, it absolutely doesn't work. So
Yeah.
remember that acronym I gave to you a little bit ago, that STEEP acronym: safety, trust, intimacy, empathy, and power. The second thing you can do, hi there, Thunder, is to just start to work on those aspects with the person around you. If you know some of their history or you know some of their backstory, and maybe the easiest one to start with is trust or safety, right? What is something
Yeah.
I can do that will make you feel safe around me? What is something I can do that will help you to trust me? Right?
And
And go ahead.
I see this with what Deadly's talking about, where, and I think us
Hmm.
as streamers and content creators see this, is that
Hmm.
just the people that come in and spend time around us, they feel like they're not doing maybe they're not doing a lot, or but they're doing a lot by just their presence and their support.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And and they're viewing it in their own position, saying, well, I can't really do much for anybody else in my real life, but I can hang out with these cool streamers and talk to them and give them my money as a subscription or maybe a donation. And the psychological, I know personally the psychological impact of that is massive. Like when I've been going through my own personal traumas, the community that surrounds me online in real life, in real life, it's like this blurring of the line got me through those horrible times in my real life, And so, but I know that there's going to be a lot of criticism for people to say, oh, all you do is sit in Twitch streams all day and watch somebody else play a video game. And yet those people would never understand the impact that has for the people.
Oh yeah.
So I want to.
It's incredible. It's just these people that day in and day out hang out in Twitch streams and provide content creators with an audience. It's like, it's just, I don't have words. It just means so much to the content creator. Yeah. It's amazing.
So my two things, I'm going to detour real quick into judgment. But as someone who streams really infrequently, who's got basically no audience, and unfortunately I'm researching and in school a lot, so when I catch a couple hours on a Saturday to put a stream up for Diablo, I don't expect anybody to be there, right? But when I do get a couple people who just randomly stumble into my stream and chat, that's like the most amazing thing ever. Like, you are choosing to watch me play this game right now. That blows my mind. Like, I cannot wrap my head. So I think it must be the coolest thing to know that, oh, I've got 30, 40 people watching me right now. Like, how neat is that? The reason I want to detour to judgment real quick is because both of you just set up what are judgment statements. And judgment, here's the cruel irony of judgment, is that it hurts both people. We do it because of in-group, out-group bias, right? We want our group to be amazing and everybody else's group sucks. And we're combating that now today, finally, which is a good thing. But when you make a judgment like that, so I'm going to play the other person to Jules here for a moment, right? I'm the person who just said, well, I can't really do anything for her. I'm not doing very much. That's a judgment statement. I'm not doing very much for her, and that sucks. And that's some reflection on my worth as a person. But what did you just, the thought process that you just drove in Jules's head was, God, I feel bad that they're here and I can't really, interact more with them or give back to them more. I can't effectively tell them how amazing this is in a way that they'll understand. That's harming both people. That's what a judgment statement does.
Yeah. And then, so a lot of times that's inflicted on yourself, right?
Yeah.
Self-judgment.
Yeah.
But then you can go down the road of when it gets externalized, when you start judging other people for the actions that they're taking or the words that they're saying or whatever it is. I've been hypersensitive to that lately, personally for myself. Like, I know that it is a human tendency to judge. I know that it is. And so, but anytime I find myself doing it, I go, whoa, 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 whoa. Why are you doing that? Why are you saying that to yourself? Why are you thinking that? And I have to, and I do it a lot. Like, I realize how much I do it, and it bothers me, Romedy. Like, it bothers me a lot because I am then judging myself, saying, man, you're so judgy, and you try not to be judgy, but these are all the things that happen when it comes to being a gamer. Like, we are constantly feeling like we're always judged. And yet I'm sitting here like catching myself doing it to other people in my brain, never externally, like to their faces, but like, God, Jules, like, shut up. Like, is what I'm basically saying to my brain.
Oh man, this is like the third opportunity I've had for this tonight. I love this stuff. But so judgments are internal statements of morals, ethics, and values. That's what a judgment is. So the only people who don't judge others are people who are truly without morals.
Really?
But that's a bad thing, right? We're like, oh, you're an immoral. But the absence of morals does not equate immoral. That's not the same thing, right?
Yeah. Okay, so now you just blew my cranium. You just freaking blew my cranium. So you basically just gave me.
But there's judgment and then people that like actually let the judgment come out, right? That's different.
Yeah.
It's like you make a judgment statement. Doesn't necessarily mean you don't have internal judgment.
Okay, let me use a real world example because it won't apply to anything that's going to bother anybody here. But like, I will find myself doing this at work where I think that one of my coworkers is not doing his job effectively. Okay, and I see him, I'm like, dude, you are not calling that customer back fast enough. You're not focusing on the right priorities. Things are falling through the cracks, and my brain is is saying, and I'm getting angry and I'm getting frustrated because it's like it's affecting me and my job. And why aren't you doing what you need to be doing? Hi, Judgy McJudgerson over here, and
judging myself now.
Exactly.
Helping or hurting.
I know, and I know that it's not helping for me to sit there and be Judgy McJudgerson over my coworkers' choices. But I can't stop it.
Okay, so my therapy brain just ran 8,000 miles down a pathway, and I don't do that to people outside of my office here unless I ask their permission. So is it okay if I shine the spotlight on you for just a moment, Jules?
Please do. It's fine with me.
Okay. Well,
you always know it's fine with
everybody
me.
watching, I want to make sure this is okay, right? So, okay. So all the things that you just mentioned, right? You're not calling them back fast enough, right? You're not prioritizing the right thing, right? So that's another enough statement. So there's all these enough statements that go in there, right? Well, enough statements belong to the perfectionist. It has to be right or it's wrong, right?
That's
you have
me.
to do it enough or it's wrong, right? Well, I'm first off, I need you to go ahead and draw the line for me that is enough. Because what is good enough? I don't have any damn idea what good enough is, Jules. And the perfectionist in your brain doesn't want you to know that. It doesn't. It wants to continue to harp on that because it wants it to be, quote, perfect, right? Here's the thing. You're a human being. You are imperfect by nature of being a human being. Perfectionist sets you up to fail. So all of those statements are only ever setting things up to fail. If the choice is perfect or failure, that's always failure. That is what those outcomes look like, right? So when you hear the enough statement in your head, that's the perfectionist talking, and that's setting an unrealistic expectation.
I'm so called out. It's so true. No, it's absolutely 100% true. And anybody who knows me will definitely tell you that I am a perfectionist, and that's who I am. And I find it really interesting when I flip it back to the gamer judgments that we've all faced. You're not spending enough time with other people in the real world.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
You
Exactly.
were ahead of where I was going there.
Yes, because I feel it all. Like, I feel it all the time in the life that we lead, and yet I've learned how to not care as much, but I still care about what those opinions are.
Because morally, they're failing, right? So that's the moral lesson right there, right? It's either perfect or it's failure from the perfectionist. So, well, I don't want to care about these things, but I do because it's a failure, right? So, go ahead, Colin.
I was going to say, you kind of put things in perspective for me earlier when you said that the way we diagnose is by excluding other things. So in order to get that far, I guess you have to realize that you have a problem or an issue or something that might be unhealthy. So then you start to dissect what that could be. And you were saying that, eventually you might land on an internet gaming disorder if you have excluded other things like, depression and things like that. But it got me thinking, would I go into searching for something that was wrong with me, or would somebody have to come to me and, tell me, like, I think something's up with you. How does that even work?
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So, and there's a couple things that pop into my head, and this is brilliant because I'm going to open up my therapy brain and I'm going to let you come in and see this on the front lines, like as me in the therapy role, like a therapist role would do it. because if you walk in my door, like anybody, not just you, but anybody that comes through my door, by virtue of being there, you have said that the discomfort of staying the same is now overwhelmed by the discomfort of change. Like we don't change. We're human beings, we don't want to be different. We like our routine, like, right? And we will deal with an extreme amount of discomfort before we will change. And so that's the statement you've made by virtue of being in my office. You're telling me that thinking about change is now the preferable choice. And as I start talking about this stuff, you're going to hear me use that phrase a lot. Preferable choice, right? Because gaming is the preferable choice in a lot of ways to whatever pain is existing in whatever the diagnosis is, right? So I do want to know, for you, the gamer, just by virtue of you walking in the office, if too much gaming is the issue you have come to me to see me, right? Well,
yeah, maybe I'm on the couch and I'm asking you, am I playing games too much?
Right, exactly. Well, by virtue of you playing games too much, you reliably will violate 5 of the 9 criteria for depression. So, in order to bill your insurance, I can diagnose you as depressed. If you are a gamer, a streamer, whatever it is, I can reliably make that diagnosis, and it means not a damn thing. But that's a way for me to bill your insurance so you can continue to see me without more money out of your pocket, right?
Gotcha.
Well, what I'm interested in with your depression, if you come to me, I'm playing a whole lot of games. Well, are there things that you used to really enjoy that you don't do and just don't enjoy anymore? That, to me, if that answers yes, now I do start to think depression. Right?
You're more interested in making me feel good or better than you are with creating a label for what's wrong with me, right?
I have zero desire for that label. That, again, that doesn't tell me a damn thing about you, the individual person. Labels are really useful at the population level, and they mean not a damn thing to the individual. So I don't care. I'm interested. What I'm interested in understanding is why this current behavior is the preferable choice, and why this current behavior is driving your discomfort. Those are the 2 questions I want to know.
Got it.
Why are you choosing to game, and why is the amount of time you're spending gaming uncomfortable? And this fits for any number of internet behaviors. Why is your social media use uncomfortable? Why is your porn use uncomfortable? Why
I'm curious. Is there a social media disorder that recognized by the World Health Organization?
So that's a super contentious issue. The mentor that I work with thinks that it is, and I hold that it's not. If it is a disorder, you're going to have to classify it somewhere, and it doesn't fit under a classification. It's not a depressive disorder. It's not an anxiety disorder. It's not a neurocognitive disorder. It's not a traumatic disorder. It's not an addictive disorder, right? So it doesn't fit a classification, and that's my primary objection to it. My secondary objection is precisely the same as my objection to internet gaming disorder. We're missing the context. It's the manifestation of the symptomology. It's not itself the problem.
Yeah.
So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because I mean, one could argue that, you know, in heavy involvement in social media is avoidance of whatever the issue is that you're dealing with.
Right.
You know, I've often known people who have been very, very heavily invested in social media because basically they just want to know what's going on with everybody else's lives, and then, you know, not have to worry about what's going on in theirs. So yeah, I think that makes sense. That makes lots of sense.
So then, I mean, if we're going to pathologize too much social media use, then we also need to pathologize, and I'm going to play a stereotype here, but we have to pathologize the 7-year-old woman who's leaning out her window all the damn time and walking over to your house to make sure everything's okay when you just pulled in and we're having a shouting match on the phone with your internet company.
Yeah.
Because that's precisely the same manifestation. It's just a different vehicle for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, or the guy that goes to the same restaurant every night to have the same meal every night, and talk to the same people every night. Is that a disorder? Is that not? Are they avoiding something? Are they not? You just don't know.
That might be best described as obsessive personality, but yeah.
Possibly, yeah.
maybe
we're hitting every branch.
Disorder is just a symptom of obsessive personality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So we have definitely kept you longer than we promised.
That's all right.
But I wanted to give you an
opportunity.
Yeah, no kidding, because we've gone all over the place. Was there any points that we didn't get to that you really wanted to make on the show tonight, Romedy?
We went everywhere and then some. I just the TLDR, if you're just catching the very end of it, just to wrap it up. I think that internet gaming disorder is in its infancy. The current iteration that you see in the ICD-10, which is not used in the United States, by the way, and even if it were used in the United States, it wouldn't be recognized by insurance, which is a whole other can of worms that we have to get to. But when it actually goes into practice in 2022, we're going to see changes to it. It's in an infancy stage, and there's 3 years of research that need to be done. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised if we see a retraction on it, because classifying as a behavioral addiction is new, it's bold, and it's on thin ice, I think, research wise. Not to say it won't be a disorder to think about, but I really think the research suggests that it's the manifestation of other behaviors. It is not itself the disorder. And that's where we're seeing the loss of culture. So the people who are making the decisions right now themselves are not gamers and do not understand gaming culture. We're applying old systems of morals and values onto this younger generation without the context for those systems of morals and values, which is why this disorder is going to show up. In the event that it does show up, I have major concerns that it's going to be wildly overdiagnosed, specifically in adolescent populations, when adolescents legally cannot advocate for themselves. If you bring someone to me and you tell me that you think they have internet gaming disorder, I immediately start thinking about the trauma isolation look of addictions, because that to me is the best description of that set of symptoms. And not to say that everyone who might fit IGD criteria has some history of trauma. That's not what I'm trying to say. The correlations exist to suggest that a high percentage of them will. And then the bit that we didn't get to is how we understand a normal versus an abnormal manifestation of behavior. And just real briefly, gaming, this is why the context is so important. In the research study I talked about, where we have to understand the amount of time that a professional spends in a virtual world, because that needs to become the benchmark for normal behavior. And we currently don't view it that way. We just say, oh, you spend 12 hours in a game. Well, if you work for 12 hours, how is that different? And my argument is, it's not. You're still doing you're doing a job, right? You're being paid for it in some way. So there's a lot of concerns. There's a lot of things that still need to be ironed out. It is absolutely a can of worms. I think on a lot of different levels. And my personal view is that depression, anxiety, trauma, specifically trauma, explain better this manifestation of symptoms than some behavioral addiction ever will. But that's because I have a different view of addictions than most of the population does.
It's going to be interesting to see how much the landscape's going to change as we get to 2022, because it's changed so drastically within the last 2 years, 5 years. I think Fortnite coming out this last year changed everything. Overwatch, the things that came before it, the things that'll come after it.
Real quick, I do want to get so in chat. I'm just gonna call you letters, because that's I fail at reading that. But so there are extremes that that would fit gaming disorder, but oftentimes I think those extremes are related to some goal. For example, if you're playing classic WoW right now and you're trying to push a world first on 40, or world first 40, then you might fall in that category. But that's goal driven in some way. It becomes chronic behavior, then that's something wholly separate, right? Someone who comes home and plays games instead of doing homework is actually quite common. I'm not convinced that that's actually abnormal behavior anymore. I think that's approaching normal behavior, especially for male teens in high school. But I do need to know the goal behind coming home to play games. If you're trying to go pro in a game, trying to build your YouTube or your social, your content creator footprint, that to me is a different thing than someone who is coming home because I can't do the homework because the homework has to be perfect. There's a big reason that I hammered on perfection for Jules a little bit ago, because perfection for me is this emerging theme that crosses across all sorts of disorders in the younger millennial generation. Perfection has been hammered into this generation, and unfortunately that, like I said, just sets us all up for failure. So the extreme manifestation there, if my homework isn't perfect, I'd prefer not to turn it in. That's becoming increasingly common, specifically in Asian countries. A lot of males in Japan, Korea, specifically Korea, if the homework is not perfect, then they cannot compete at the class and the academics of their class, and so they just won't turn the homework in. And they also know that they're either going to do their military service in Korea or that they're going to become professional in a game. So where is their motivation to continue to turn in the homework if they can't compete academically and they're going to go do this other thing?
Yeah.
So again, there we're applying a moral judgment in a way that, but I need to know that info before we can ever talk about that. So
Yeah. Wow.
now that I have kept you long enough, any last questions for me?
Oh my goodness. I mean, every single time I have spoken to you, you have managed to blow my mind, and it was not even a question that you did it this time.
Yeah, I guess
I love these conversations.
my takeaway from this, and you kind of you shined your light on it, I guess, is the issue with adolescence and how we were kind of making headway in this current landscape of esports and gaming, and how parents and adults were looking at games a little differently. And now we have this news of an official disorder being recognized by the World Health Organization. And is that going to raise eyebrows now? Or parents going to be looking at their kids a little differently? Do you have any advice that you would say to a parent or a person in power over a youth, and looking at them and watching them play games, having concerns?
Yeah, be careful and practice empathy. If you think you're, I'm going to pick on men because my view is that this disorder is going to primarily affect men. Not that there aren't women who will suffer with it, but I think we're going to look at men primarily to diagnose them with it. Not intentionally to be gendered there. That's just straight statistics coming out from the research. If you're worried about your son or daughter and you think they're gaming too much, they're playing too much, if you don't understand why they're doing it, then you're doing your child a disservice. And this broaches not just gaming, this is everything. If you don't understand why your child is doing something, then you're doing a disservice by trying to tell them to do something else or punishing them for doing that thing. Right, because the punishment is only going to affect their short-term behavior. It's not going to affect the long-term, and they're just going to go back to it. Remember that your child is making a choice, and this is a preferable choice. Every human being, with every decision they make, is choosing the thing that is preferable to them in the moment with the information they have, right? As adults, as old people, we tend to think that we know better because we've been there and we've experienced it. And the truth is that historically speaking, that was great wisdom. In the 17 or 1800s, you could listen to the wisdom of your grandparents, your great-grandparents, because your life had not changed that much. You were doing the same thing that they did. That is no longer true. Our pace of change has elevated so much as to be basically vertical if you graph it. We get mad now when the promised phone update doesn't roll out and it's 12 minutes late and we're upset. Whereas in the 1800s, change was glacial. So it's just no longer appropriate to try and believe in your own wisdom when the world of today is so radically different for your child than it was even just 20, 30 years ago when you were a child. There was one. Oh, just a random piece of unrelated trivia. Do you know why the legal age is 18 and why we're so focused on 18-year-olds here?
Actually, I don't know.
I've always wondered that.
Because Napoleon Bonaparte decided that if you're an 18-year-old male, you could serve in his Grand Army when he was trying to conquer Europe.
So I guess I've always wondered, why is that? Why can you join? Why can you fight and die for your country at 18, but you can't grab a beer until you're 21?
Well, so that coffee is why you ought to have me back on the show, because that is another 90-minute talk about that topic right there.
All right.
The short answer, and I encourage you to look this up, but the short answer is a name who has impacted it's a man who impacted all of your lives, and you don't even know his name. His name's Harry Anslinger. He is the reason drugs are illegal today. He is the reason there was a war on drugs in the first place, and he is the reason why the drinking age is 21. Now, the research on this, the drinking age ought to be 24 for women, 27 for men. I'm not going to justify that. The legal age to smoke marijuana ought to be 24 for women, 27 for men. We're never going to go there. But if you
No.
just want to, if you want to look at a substance through the potential damage it does to your brain, alcohol, marijuana in significant doses can damage your brain up to the point where it's fully formed, which for women is about 24 and in men is about 27.
Oh, I definitely lost a few brain cells in college for sure.
I mean, you have to use it like extreme, right? But that's like we have just arbitrarily chosen this 18-year-old. Napoleon chose it almost 2 centuries ago. It's outdated and it's useless. It absolutely
That's
has no
wild.
place in today, right? So, same thing with all of our substance use things, but I have strong opinions there that I won't relate.
Next episode, the 90
Right?
minute.
I mean, I feel like there
Next
needs to
episode.
be frequent episodes of the Jules and Coffee Hour with a Romedy.
Same. This
Because
is fantastic.
man, like I always love talking to you, man. It's just rad.
Yeah, this is awesome.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So we're gonna wrap it up here, I think, but before we do that, please tell everybody where you can be found and followed and spoken to if you've got more questions.
Sure. So I am on Twitter primarily. That's at RomedyMC, MC for Minecraft on the end, at RomedyMC. I have an old YouTube channel that I used to do a ton of Minecraft videos. That's why the MC's on the end. I am on Twitch. I stream very infrequently. It's also at RomedyMC. I tend to play Heroes of the Storm, Diablo. I also like creative building games, Satisfactory, Minecraft. I play a little bit of Ark on occasion. Those are the main places to find me. If you happen to live in the Toledo area and you want to be involved in some research, come on by the University of Toledo. My office is 5150J in University Hall.
That's awesome. And come by and just like meet him and say hi and hang out and grab a beer. Let's talk about all that stuff that we talked about today. You're the best, Romedy. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank y'all for having me, and thanks for always going long. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Romedy.
We have a couple of announcements before we head out of here, and one of them is that our t-shirt is still available. Coffee put a link in the chat room. If you guys are listening to the podcast version, go out there and check our Twitter feeds. I'm Jules RPG. He's Coffee Club _TV, and we've got links to it there as well. And we're going to be making that purchase like super soon, so you got to get in there and buy that shirt if you want it, because it ain't going to be around forever.
Yeah, I think we'll put it in the YouTube comments here as well. And then my current plan is, and I'd love for you guys to all participate, I'd love to give away a few of these shirts for free. If you guys are interested in getting a Jules and Coffee Hour shirt, just please retweet the tweet. We're going to tweet this episode out. Follow Jules and I on Twitter. Like our YouTube page, and we'll be selecting winners from people that retweet the tweet, essentially. So please check us out on Twitter, and we'll let you guys know if you want a t-shirt.
That'd be awesome. So next week we're going to do a regular show. It's been a little bit of time for us to do a 2-person show, so we're going to do another one of those coming up next week, and we're super excited. So I'm going to play the music, and we're going to get out of here with this lovely sound right here. Thank you guys for being here with this episode of the Jules and Coffee Hour. We hope you enjoyed this time by the fire. Here's the music.
Want to contact the show? You can find us at podcast@heroeshearth.com. If you want to connect with us on Twitter, you can find me at coffeeclub_TV. You can find Jules at JulesRPG. You can also use those handles to follow our personal streams on Twitch, so you can be notified when we go live.
You can join us for these live broadcasts at twitch.tv/HeroesHearth on Tuesdays at 6:30 p.m. Central, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, or find us in podcast form on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Pocket Cast, TuneIn, and more.
If you like the show and would like to support the great entertainment brought to you by Heroes Hearth, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/HeroesHearth.
Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Romedy, for being our amazing special guest. Thank you, chat room, for being engaging and fun and awesome. And until next time, we're glad you're here. Oh my goodness. The cats were hilarious in the background, Coffee.
Right?
Could Could you
Loved
see
it.
Daisy just doing her thing, and she's like, meow.
So you might want to use the audio from stream, because I think that was only coming through on Discord.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was checking Discord. It was picking up in Discord, but not in OBS. So
Oh, weird. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll check them both and see.
it's
Cameron, you guys
it's
were
dinner
rad.
time,
Thank
so
you.
Daisy's like freaking out.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we went long, so I know she's probably hungry.
Yep.
So, did you hear the thunder? My God.
Oh my
No,
god.
I couldn't hear the
yeah.
thunder.
Oh, I
Romedy
did.
could hear my rumbles.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
he could hear them. It was like, it was just happening there for a while. It was pouring rain in here, too.
Oh,
I was like,
wow.
oh, geez. Hopefully my power, my internet's going to stay on.
Wow.
Uh-huh. Oh, man. All right. We're going to get out of here and do the thing because I got to still post the show up tonight.
Okay.
And, yeah. So we will see you guys next week. Love you so much. Thank you for being with
Yeah,
us, Romedy.
thank you,
Thank
Romedy.
you.
It was awesome.
y'all.
Seriously,
Thank
so
y'all.
cool. We gotta have you back on the show again. It's gotta happen.
Yeah, you guys chat. If you have topics that you want us to hit up with Romedy, let us know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
There's like a bazillion of them. I'm sure we could do them. So.
I can keep coming back until I don't blow y'all's minds anymore. And I don't,
That is
when
never gonna
stops, then
happen.
I'm done. I'm done.
Well, it
It's
seems
never
like each
gonna
time we
happen.
have you on, we'll like spiral into another conversation that's like a bigger, you know. Yeah. So cool.
All right. We'll see you guys next week. Have a great night. I'm going to host somebody, so stay tight. I think we'll send it over to Kai Berries.
Have a good night, ladies and gentlemen. Bye. Thanks for listening. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, bye.